Well, I want to start this by just thanking all our speakers and panelists for so generously sharing your insights and perspectives with us here today. I think the recent period has really deepened our awareness of the importance of resilience in the face of COVID, conflict, and climate change, and growing conservatism, as Alicia put it in her keynote, the 4 Cs. So it feels timely for resilience to have been the theme of this summit. And I learned a lot about resilience in my 30 years at CAMFED in working with young people in the most difficult circumstances who succeeded against the odds. And today's summit, I think, has provided a valuable space for reflection on the essential role of resilience. And what I'll try to do here is to draw out some key takeaways. My first takeaway is to recognize that education is key to fostering resilience, both at an individual and at a societal level. And the work of our research laureate, Wolfgang Lutz, and indeed that of Eric Hanushek, our 2021 prize laureate, really underlines this, how education, and particularly girls' education, creates the conditions for a resilient and thriving society. And secondly, and fundamentally, we need to recognize that for the majority of young people around the world, resilience is not a choice. Just now in the fireside chat with Warchild, we heard that resilience is essential for children living in conflict-affected and resource-constrained areas. And it's essential, yes, but as Vi pointed out to us in the first panel, a constant state of stress is toxic to a young person's health. So rather than requiring young people to be resilient against unrelenting stress, we must find ways to mitigate this stress, and we must also be conscious of the pressure this places on teachers in turn in their efforts to alleviate the stress experienced by their students. And it's important to recognize that we're not promoting resilience in young people or indeed in teachers for them to better bear the brunt of a system that may be failing them. In situations where we see high levels of dropout from school, we cannot assume that this is because young people lack resilience. And similarly, when we see large numbers of teachers leaving the profession, it's not because their resilience falls short. Individual resilience cannot offset systemic failings. We need to focus on creating the conditions for young people and teachers, not just to survive the system, but to thrive, not to force resilience, but to nurture it. Which brings me to my next point, which is that resilience is not just about being able to cope in the face of adversity. It's about agency. Or as Anjali in panel 2 put it, agency is the through line of resilience. Agency is the ability to effect change in one's life and in the community, to act with purpose. So how do we build agency and thereby foster resilience? And to consider this, I want to step back for a moment and put on my Yidan Prize laureate hat to share a story from CAMFED, which relates to the work that we've undertaken with our Yidan Prize funds. Now, the constituency that CAMFED works with are girls in rural areas of Africa who are marginalized or excluded from education largely because of poverty. Even for those girls who are in school, their hold on education is tenuous and dropout levels are high. I recall one young woman in Zimbabwe, Bridget, saying, "Every time we ran out of money and did not have enough to eat, I had to drop out of school and go and work in other people's fields in exchange for a bucket of maize, our staple food. And that's what I came to believe I was worth, a bucket of maize." And this lack of self-worth is debilitating. It undermines resilience. It's little wonder that in CAMFED's work, we found that one of the highest causes of school dropout among girls, second only to lack of finance to meet their school-going needs, was low self-esteem. So how do we address this? In tandem with working with communities to identify children most in need of support, we co-created with young people and teachers a new self-development curriculum to be delivered alongside academic subjects in schools. And that curriculum included Bridget's story. And I'll never forget when it was first introduced in schools and her story was read. Both girls and boys came up and said, "How did you know my story? Where did you get my story from?" Because for the very first time, they had heard something in Bridget's story that resonated with their own, unlike the material in their school textbooks, which is all too often alien to their experience. focused as it is on urban, better-off students, meaning that these very learning materials continually reinforce a sense of other and better, exacerbating these young people's sense of marginalisation and undermining their self-worth. And as Sultan pointed out in panel 3, education programmes are too often tailored to urban markets and ignore needs in rural areas. Relevance and resilience go hand in hand. Importantly, this self-development curriculum is being delivered by young people from the community who are returning to their local schools and taking up the role of learner guide alongside teachers. And you can see a learner guide in action here. Learner guides are able to bridge the distance between home and school for marginalised children and the gap between them attending class and having the confidence to participate and learn. And as young people from the local area, learner guides know the background of students and have the connection to communities and local authorities to be able to source additional support in times of crisis that might otherwise push a student out of school. They are role models who students can relate to, and Adrian on panel 2 raised the importance of role models in fostering resilience. So what's been the impact? Among those children, both boys and girls, who've benefited from this curriculum and from learner guide support, we've seen great improvements. Girls were 3 times less likely to drop out of school, and we saw more than double the rate of learning in academic subjects. It resulted in young people enjoying school more. They had greater confidence and a greater belief that school was relevant for their future. They were clearly more resilient. And I'm sure that this was also because the system was more resilient too, with school graduates and community leaders enhancing the support structures in schools for marginalised children and taking some of the weight off teachers' shoulders. So to my next point, which is that if we are to foster resilient systems, then we need to focus on the most marginalised children, those who are furthest and hardest to reach. Because if the system is responsive and resilient enough to work for them, then it can work for all. This was the conclusion of the evaluation on CAMFED's initiative, that the conditions which led to improved outcomes for the most marginalised translated to a push-up for all children. It reflects Javier's point in panel 3 that resilient systems are those that are responsive to local need. And it resonates too with what Becky said, that a focus on the education needs of displaced children can have a stabilising effect and strengthen the preparedness of school systems in view of the growing challenges associated with displacement and climate change. Another initiative in the Yidan Prize community that is focused on responding to the needs of marginalised children is that of BRAC, who are working with children in Rohingya refugee communities. BRAC's intervention focuses on play-based learning and nurturing creativity among young children. And this brings me to my next takeaway, which is this, that creativity is key to resilience. Earlier this year, the Yidan Prize Foundation co-hosted with the OECD the launch of the PISA report on creativity. And PISA is the programme on international student assessment, and this was the first time that they'd measured creativity. The report concludes that creative thinking acts as a powerful stimulus to resilience and well-being. Nurturing creative thinking skills in students empowers them to innovate, problem solve, and adapt in an ever-changing world. And this very much resonates too with the work on growth mindset by Carol Dweck, another Yidan Prize laureate. However, one of the most disturbing findings of the PISA report was on the impact of social media on creative thinking. There was a significantly negative association, and perhaps even more shocking was the impact of social media on learning. The analysis shows that the negative effect on learning of social media or technology for leisure was even greater than the impact of school closures during the pandemic. We need to better understand the complex relationship between education, technology, and resilience. I mean, we've seen the value of technology in supporting the resilience of education systems, particularly during school closures in COVID, and War Child's Can't Wait to Learn initiative underlines the importance of EdTech in situations of conflict and displacement. And indeed, the OECD PISA results also showed that students who used digital devices for learning rather than leisure achieved high scores. But clearly, we need to be doing more in education to support students to navigate the world that is opening up through digital technology and to counter the distraction and indeed destruction that can be caused by social media. The emerging negative effects of social media on creativity and learning are one thing, but these take on a whole other dimension when it comes to its association with self-harm among young people and social division between young men and young women. There's never been a bigger gap between political attitudes based on gender than there is with the current generation of young people, and this widening gap coincides with the growing use of social media. Education has a vital role to play in supporting young people to navigate the use of technology and engage with social media in a way that is constructive and counters division and thereby fosters resilience. Otherwise, the quality of human connection that is the very bedrock of society, the roots of our collective resilience, is undermined. Which brings me to my next takeaway, and I want to quote Ash here from panel 1, who said, "Educate children not only as individuals, but as networks." Learning how to engage in a network and benefiting from the peer support and challenge it can offer would seem an essential component of education. And we've seen this value in the work of our Yidan Prize laureates, Escuela Nueva among them, in promoting methodologies that encourage young people to collaborate in learning, with the educator's role being one of facilitation and connection. And of course, networks are so vital for young people in navigating life after school or college, when they confront the dearth of jobs and opportunities ahead of them and feel the weight of family expectation on their shoulders, while at the same time, the framework of support that the education system provided them falls away. It's a period when their resilience is tested to the core and the importance of a network comes to the fore. That's been our experience in CAMFED, and it was the motivation for setting up our graduate network that Angie spoke about in panel 1, of which she is a founding member. This network provides peer support to young women post-school and is now nearly 300,000 members strong. And one of the important outcomes of this network is that it's providing an incentive for young people to stay in their communities after school or college. By fostering local opportunities and connections, it's mitigating the pressure for young people to move out in search of work, and it's also incentivizing their engagement in community development. The learner guide role in schools that I mentioned earlier is one such example. It brings to mind the words of Michelle Obama when she said, "It's one thing to get yourself out of a stuck place, but it is another thing entirely to try and get the place itself unstuck." Being prepared to take on the challenges in your community to get the place unstuck requires a deep well of resilience. And it's a well that we need to dig deep for young people to draw on, because for the majority of young people and their communities, these challenges are growing, particularly in the context of climate change. The late Julius Nyerere, former president of Tanzania, once said, "Education is not a way to escape poverty, it is a way to fight it." And to me, that sentiment captures the essence of the relationship between education and resilience. And I believe it's important that we use this moment to reflect on that relationship. On the one hand, to recognize the vital role of education in fostering resilience, and on the other, to ensure that education itself is itself resilient. We all have a part to play in that. It means taking collective responsibility for education, recognizing that education is a common good. And if it is to be resilient, then that means ensuring it is adequately financed through public funding and that there is collective accountability for results. The UN's Futures of Education initiative takes up this notion of collective responsibility. It calls for a new social contract for education and it aims to catalyze a global debate on how education needs to be rethought in a world of increasing complexity, uncertainty, and fragility. And I'm delighted that Sobi Tawel, who leads this initiative, is here with us today. And finally, education is the driving force of social progress. That was the belief of Dr. Charles Chen Yidan in founding the Yidan Prize Foundation, and it's a belief shared by all of us who are part of the Yidan Prize community. And on a personal note, I believe the greatest resilience stems from when you draw strength from who you are, what you stand for, and who you stand with. And I'm honored to stand here today with fellow laureates, members, friends, and partners of the Yidan Prize community, who together represent the richness and diversity of research and practice in education, and who offer inspiration and evidence for what's possible. Together, we stand for education's transformative potential, for the prospect of creating a better world through education, and together, as a global education community, we can make it happen. Thank you.